What happens when royal privilege meets American television reality? When Prince Harry walked into the studio of The View, expecting the usual softball questions and sympathetic nods, he had no idea he was about to face the most explosive confrontation of his media career. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is the moment when entitled arrogance crashed headfirst into unfiltered truth. By the end of this segment, security would be called, producers would be scrambling, and one royal would be escorted out in disgrace. But before we dive into this incredible clash, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities who can't handle tough questions. The atmosphere in the View studio was electric that morning. Prince Harry sat across from the iconic Hot Topics table, his posture rigid and his jaw already clenched before the cameras even started rolling. Whoopi Goldberg, the show's veteran moderator, shuffled her papers with the practiced ease of someone who had seen every type of guest walk through those doors. Joy Behar cracked her knuckles, a mischievous glint in her eye that suggested she was ready for battle. Sarah Haynes adjusted her notes, while Alyssa Farah Griffin leaned back in her chair with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what buttons to push. Sunny Hostin, ever the prosecutor, had her legal pad ready, filled with questions that would make any publicist nervous. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice carrying that familiar authority that had made her a household name. "We're here with Prince Harry, who's been making headlines again with his latest revelations about the royal family." "Harry, thanks for joining us." Prince Harry forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for having me, Whoopi. Though I have to say, I'm hoping for a more respectful conversation than what I've been getting from the British press." The comment hung in the air like a challenge, and Joy Behar was the first to pick up the gauntlet. "Respectful? Harry, you've written a book trashing your family, given interviews calling them racists, and now you're sitting here expecting us to treat you with kid gloves. This isn't Oprah's couch, honey." Harry's face flushed slightly. "I think there's a difference between telling the truth and trashing someone. Joy, everything I've said has been my lived experience." "Your lived experience," Alyssa interjected, "seems to change depending on which interview you're giving. Last month, you said you wanted privacy. Now you're on a media tour. Which is it?" "I'm trying to set the record straight," Harry snapped, his composure already starting to crack. "The British tabloids have been lying about me and my wife for years. Someone needs to tell the truth." Sunny Hostin leaned forward, her prosecutorial instincts kicking in. "But Harry, you're asking us to believe that you're the victim here. You're a grown man who chose to step away from royal duties, chose to move to California, chose to sign multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. These sound like choices, not victimization." "You don't understand the pressure," Harry shot back, his voice rising. "None of you understand what it's like to be born into that family, to have every move scrutinized, to have your privacy invaded." "Oh, we don't understand pressure?" Joy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honey, I've been in this business for decades. I've dealt with critics, haters, and people trying to tear me down. But I didn't write a book blaming my mother for my problems," the studio audience murmured, sensing the tension building. Harry's media training seemed to be failing him as his face grew redder. "That's not what I did. My book was about healing, about breaking cycles." "Breaking cycles?" Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. "You mean like the cycle of serving your country and your people? Because last I checked, that's what royalty is supposed to do." "I am serving people," Harry protested. "I'm serving them by being authentic, by showing them that it's okay to speak out against injustice." Sarah Haynes, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "Harry, I think what's confusing to a lot of people is that you seem to want it both ways. You want to be a private citizen when it suits you, but you also want to keep the title, keep the platform, keep the benefits of being royal. Can you see how that might come across as hypocritical?" "I never asked to be born into this," Harry said, his voice taking on a whiny quality that made several audience members shift uncomfortably. "I didn't choose this life. But you chose to profit from it," Alyssa pointed out. "You chose to monetize your family secrets. You chose to air your grievances on the world's biggest platforms. Those were choices." Harry's hands clenched into fists on the table. "I'm trying to protect my family, my wife, my children. If that means speaking out against the institution that tried to destroy us, then so be it." "Destroy you?" Joy's voice was incredulous. "Harry, you were given everything: education, privilege, opportunities that most people can only dream of. You were beloved by the public. You had meaningful work with your charities. You had a platform to make a real difference. And you threw it all away for what? A grudge." "You're twisting my words," Harry said, his voice getting louder. "This isn't about a grudge. This is about standing up for what's right. What's right?" Whoopi's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What's right is taking responsibility for your choices instead of blaming everyone else. What's right is showing some gratitude for the privileges you were born with instead of complaining about them." The audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Harry looked around the table, seeing no sympathy in any of the women's faces, and his carefully constructed public persona began to crumble. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "I came here expecting a civilized conversation, not an ambush." "An ambush?" Sonny laughed coldly. "Harry, these are basic questions that any journalist would ask. If you can't handle them, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." "I can handle them just fine," Harry snapped. "What I can't handle is being lectured by people who don't know what they're talking about." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from professional to personally affronted. "Excuse me, did you just say we don't know what we're talking about?" Harry realized he had crossed a line, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "I'm just saying that maybe you should stick to topics you actually understand." The collective gasp from the audience was audible. Joy Behar's mouth fell open in shock while Alyssa and Sarah exchanged incredulous looks. Sunny Hostin's prosecutor instincts kicked into overdrive, and she leaned forward like a predator sensing weakness. But it was Whoopi who spoke first, her voice deadly calm. "Young man, I've been in this business longer than you've been alive. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, and celebrities who actually have something meaningful to say. And right now, you're sitting at my table acting like a spoiled brat who can't handle being held accountable for his actions." Harry's face went from red to purple as Whoopi's words hit their mark. The studio audience was so quiet you could hear the cameras whirring, but the silence only seemed to fuel his rage. "Don't you dare lecture me about accountability," he snarled, pointing his finger across the table at Whoopi. "You sit here in your comfortable chair, making millions talking about other people's lives, and you think you can judge me." The collective intake of breath from the audience was audible. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze, unsure if they should keep rolling. Joy Behar's eyes widened in disbelief, while Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. But Whoopi Goldberg, veteran of countless confrontations, simply stared at Harry with the kind of cold fury that had made her legendary. "Oh, we're doing this now." Whoopi's voice was dangerously quiet. "You want to talk about comfortable chairs and making millions? Boy, you were born with a silver spoon so big it's a miracle you didn't choke on it. You've never worked a real day in your life, and you're going to sit here and lecture me about earning my keep?" "I served my country," Harry shot back, his voice cracking with emotion. "I was in Afghanistan while you were here making jokes on television." "And we respected you for that," Alyssa jumped in, her political background evident in her measured tone. "But that was years ago, Harry. What have you done since then besides complain and cash checks?" Harry turned on her with venom in his eyes. "What have I done? I've exposed the truth about one of the most powerful institutions in the world. I've shown people that the royal family isn't the fairy tale they pretend to be." "No," Sunny said, her legal training evident in her precise delivery. "What you've done is betray the trust of people who loved you. You aired your family's private business for profit, and then played the victim when people called you out on it." "Betray trust?" Harry's voice rose sharply. "They betrayed me first. They hung me out to dry. They refused to protect my wife. They leaked stories about us to save themselves." "According to who?" Joy interjected. "According to you? Because last I checked, you're the only one going on television making these claims. Your grandmother, who spent 70 years serving her country, never said a word against you. Your father, who's dealing with cancer, has maintained his dignity. But you keep talking." Harry slammed his hand on the table, causing the water glasses to jump. "Don't you dare bring my grandmother into this. She's gone, and she can't defend herself." "She's gone," Whoopi said slowly, "and you're using her death as an excuse to trash everything she stood for. That woman devoted her entire life to service, to putting duty before personal feelings. And you're spitting on her legacy." "I'm honoring her legacy by telling the truth," Harry screamed, his composure completely shattered. "She would want people to know what really happened." "Would she?" Sarah asked quietly. "Because from everything I've read about Queen Elizabeth, she believed in discretion, in handling family matters privately, in putting the institution before personal grievances. Does any of what you're doing sound like something she would approve of?" Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a moment, he seemed to realize the corner he had backed himself into, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat. "You didn't know her. None of you knew her. You're just repeating what you read in the papers, and you're exploiting her memory for book sales," Alyssa fired back. The audience was starting to murmur now, and not in Harry's favor. He could feel the room turning against him, and it only made him more desperate. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is why I had to leave. This is why I had to speak out, because people like you refuse to see the truth." "The truth?" Joy laughed bitterly. "Harry, the truth is that you were given every advantage in life, every opportunity to make a difference, and you chose to throw it all away because you couldn't handle being second fiddle to your brother." "This isn't about William," Harry snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Sunny leaned forward, her prosecutor instincts in full display. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like everything you've done has been about getting back at your brother for being born first. The interviews, the book, the constant public statements, they all seem designed to hurt the people who have the one thing you'll never have, the crown." "That's not true," Harry protested, but his voice was getting weaker. "Then why?" Whoopi said, her voice cutting through his protests like a blade. "Do you keep talking? Why do you keep giving interviews? Why do you keep writing books? If you really wanted privacy, if you really wanted to move on, why are you here?" Harry looked around the table, seeing no sympathy, no understanding, just 5 women who had seen through his carefully constructed narrative. "Because someone has to hold them accountable." "Hold them accountable for what?" Joy demanded. "For not making you king? For not changing centuries of tradition to suit your feelings? For not turning the monarchy into the Harry show? For being racists," Harry said, playing what he thought was his trump card. "For treating my wife like garbage because of the color of her skin?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the audience seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how the panel would respond. It was Whoopi who spoke first, her voice deadly serious. "Harry, as a black woman who has faced real racism, who has lived through actual discrimination, I'm going to tell you something. Racism is not disagreeing with someone. Racism is not having protocols and procedures. Racism is not expecting someone to follow the same rules as everyone else." "You don't understand," Harry said desperately. "There were conversations about my son's skin color." Conversations that you've never fully explained, Sonny pointed out. Conversations that could have been innocent curiosity. Conversations that you've allowed people to imagine the worst about without providing context. I shouldn't have to provide context, Harry said, his voice rising again. The fact that it happened at all is enough, is it? Alyssa asked, because throwing around accusations of racism without proof, without context, without giving people a chance to defend themselves, that's not justice. That's character assassination. Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to sit here and defend myself to you people. You people? Joy's eyebrows shot up. Oh, now we're you people? That's rich, coming from someone who's been lecturing us about racism. That's not what I meant, Harry backtracked, but it was too late. Sit down, Whoopi commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been in charge of this table for years. You came here to talk, so talk. But don't you dare stand up and try to intimidate us because you don't like what you're hearing. Harry remained standing, his hands shaking with rage. I'm not intimidating anyone. I'm just tired of being attacked. Attacked? Sarah laughed incredulously. Harry, we're asking you questions. If you consider that an attack, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Maybe I shouldn't, Harry said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. Maybe I should just walk out of here right now. Maybe you should, Whoopi said calmly. But before you do, let me tell you something. You came on this show thinking you could charm your way through another softball interview. You thought you could smile and play the victim, and we'd all nod along like good little women. But this is The View, and we ask the questions that need to be asked. I'm not playing the victim, Harry protested weakly. Then what do you call this? Joy gestured at his clenched fists and red face. You're having a tantrum because 5 women refused to treat you like the special little prince you think you are. Harry's hands were trembling now. Whether from rage or humiliation, it was impossible to tell. He looked around the studio like a cornered animal, his carefully crafted public image lying in ruins at his feet. You know what? He said, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. This is exactly why I left. This is exactly the kind of toxic environment that drove me away. Toxic environment? Sonny's voice was incredulous. Harry, you're the one who came in here with an attitude. You're the one who started insulting us when we asked legitimate questions. You're the one having a meltdown because we won't bow down to your Royal Highness. I'm not having a meltdown, Harry snapped, even as his voice cracked and his face turned an alarming shade of red. I'm standing up for myself against a bunch of bitter women who are trying to tear me down. The gasp from the audience was audible. Even the production crew seemed to freeze. Whoopi's expression shifted from annoyed to dangerous. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades in show business. Did you just call us bitter women? Whoopi's words were measured, each one delivered like a hammer blow. You spoiled little boy. You came on our show, disrespected our table, insulted our intelligence, and now you're calling us bitter because we won't kiss your royal behind? I didn't mean... Harry started to backtrack, but Joy cut him off. Oh, you meant it, Joy said, her voice dripping with disdain. This is who you really are, isn't it? This is the real Prince Harry. Not the charming veteran, not the devoted husband, not the caring father. This is an entitled brat who thinks his title gives him the right to treat people however he wants. Harry's composure finally snapped completely. How dare you? He screamed, his voice echoing through the studio. How dare you sit there and judge me? You don't know anything about my life, about what I've been through, about the sacrifices I've made. Sacrifices? Alyssa's voice was sharp with disbelief. What sacrifices? Moving to a mansion in California? Signing multi-million-dollar deals? Getting paid to trash your family on television? Those are sacrifices? I gave up everything for my family. Harry yelled, spittle flying from his mouth. I walked away from everything I knew to protect my wife and children." "You walked away because you couldn't handle not being the center of attention," Sarah said quietly, her calm voice somehow more devastating than shouting. "You walked away because your brother was getting more headlines than you were." "That's not," but his voice lacked any conviction. "Isn't it?" Whoopi leaned forward, her eyes locked on Harry's. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like everything you've done has been about getting attention. The interviews, the book, the constant public statements. If you really wanted privacy, you'd shut up and live your life." Harry was pacing now, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. You don't understand what it's like to be trapped in that system." "Trapped?" Joy laughed bitterly. "Harry, you were a prince. You had wealth, privilege, protection, and a platform to make a real difference in the world. Most people would kill for what you threw away." "I didn't throw anything away," Harry shouted. "I chose my family over an institution that was trying to destroy us." "No," Sunny said, her legal training evident in her precise delivery. "You chose money over duty. You chose celebrity over service. You chose revenge over reconciliation." Harry whirled around to face her, his eyes blazing with fury. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're just another lawyer who thinks she knows everything." "I know enough," Sunny shot back. "I know that you've spent the last few years making millions by trashing people who can't defend themselves. I know that you've used your children as shields while you attack their grandparents. I know that you've turned your personal family drama into a business model." "I'm protecting my children," Harry screamed, his voice breaking. "I'm making sure they don't go through what I went through." "By making them tabloid fodder?" Alyssa asked. "By turning their birth into a media circus? By ensuring that every detail of their lives will be scrutinized because of your public feuds?" Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a moment, he seemed to realize the contradiction in his own words, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. "This interview is over," he said finally, his voice raw from shouting. "I'm done with this circus." "Oh, now it's a circus." Whoopi's voice was deadly calm. "When you came in here, you were happy to be part of the show. Now that we've asked you some tough questions, suddenly we're beneath you." "I said I'm done," Harry repeated, moving toward the exit. "You are done," Joy called after him. "You're done with this interview. You're done with your family. You're done with your country. But you're not done taking their money, are you?" Harry stopped dead in his tracks and turned around slowly. "What did you say?" "You heard me," Joy said, standing up to face him. "You walked away from your duties, but you kept the title. You rejected the institution, but you kept the benefits. You wanted out of the royal family, but you kept the royal name. You can't have it both ways, Harry." "I earned that title," Harry said, his voice shaking with rage. "You were born with it," Sarah corrected. "And titles come with responsibilities. You can't just take the perks and ignore the obligations." "I don't owe them anything," Harry said, his voice rising again. "They never protected me. They never stood up for me. They threw me to the wolves." "They gave you everything," Whoopi said, her voice cutting through his protests. "They gave you an education, a purpose, a platform, and a family. And you repaid them by selling their secrets to the highest bidder." Harry's face was purple now, veins bulging in his neck. "That's it. I'm calling security." "Security?" Sonny laughed. "Harry, you're the guest here. You don't call security on us. We call security on you." As if summoned by her words, 2 large security guards appeared at the edge of the set. The audience was buzzing now, phones out, recording what was clearly going to be television history. "Gentlemen," Whoopi said calmly, not taking her eyes off Harry, "I think our guest needs to leave." "You can't throw me out," Harry sputtered. "I'm a prince." "Not in America, you're not," Joy said with a smile. "In America, You're just another entitled celebrity having a tantrum." The security guards moved closer, and Harry seemed to realize for the first time that he was actually going to be escorted out. His face went from purple to pale in seconds. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice cracking. "This is assault. This is discrimination. This is consequences," Alyssa said simply. "Something you've been avoiding for years." Harry looked around the studio one last time, seeing nothing but contempt in the faces staring back at him. The audience was silent, but their judgment was clear. Even the production crew seemed embarrassed for him. "You'll regret this," he said weakly. But the fight had gone out of him. "The only thing we regret," Whoopi said as the security guards flanked Harry, "is that it took this long for someone to call you out on your behavior." As the guards escorted Harry toward the exit, he tried one last desperate play. "This will be all over the news. You'll be sorry you treated me this way." "Let it be all over the news," Joy called after him. "Let people see what you're really like when you can't control the narrative." Harry's final words as he was led away were barely audible. "You don't know what you've done." "We know exactly what we've done," Whoopi said to his retreating figure. "We've shown America who Prince Harry really is." The studio fell silent as the doors closed behind Harry and his escorts. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. The view panel sat back in their chairs, the adrenaline of the confrontation still coursing through their veins. "Well," Joy said finally, breaking the silence, "that was something." "That was a man who has never been held accountable for his actions," Sunny said, shaking her head. "And he couldn't handle it when someone finally did." "The most telling part," Sarah added, "was how quickly he resorted to insults and intimidation when we wouldn't play along with his victim narrative." "He showed his true colors," Alyssa agreed. "And they weren't pretty." Whoopi looked directly into the camera, her expression serious. "Let this be a lesson to everyone watching. It doesn't matter what title you have, what family you were born into, or how much money you have. If you can't handle being asked tough questions, if you can't accept responsibility for your choices, if you think you can intimidate people into submission, then you don't deserve respect." The audience erupted in applause, finally releasing the tension that had been building throughout the confrontation. As the cameras continued to roll, capturing the aftermath of one of the most explosive interviews in television history, one thing was clear. Prince Harry had just learned that in America, titles don't protect you from the truth. So, what do you think? Was Prince Harry justified in his anger, or did he show his true character when the pressure was on? Let me know in the comments below.